Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. He was more than just a warrior. Alexander the Great was a force of nature, molded from a blend of genius, ambition, and destiny. As the camera sweeps across ancient battlefields, detailed maps of sprawling empires, and a youthful Alexander riding with fiery purpose, the story begins with awe. His teacher was none other than Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the time, who instilled in him a thirst for knowledge, strategy, and power. At just 20 years old, Alexander ascended to the throne of Macedon after the assassination of his father, King Philip II. Few expected him to hold on to power. Fewer still imagined he would launch one of the most extraordinary military campaigns in history. Within a decade, he shattered the Persian Empire, stretched his reach from Greece to Egypt and as far as India, and founded more than 20 cities bearing his name. Yet for all his victories, his downfall was just as swift and dramatic. Was it his unchecked ambition, the burden of a sprawling empire too vast to control, or was it betrayal and illness that undid the world's greatest conqueror? The rise was meteoric, but the fall, sudden and shrouded in mystery. Born in 356 BCE in Pella, the ancient capital of Macedonia, Alexander's early life was shaped by both privilege and prophecy. He was the son of King Philip II, a military genius who had transformed Macedonia into a dominant force in the Greek world, and Queen Olympias, a woman known for her intense ambition and mysterious religious devotion. From a young age, Alexander was immersed in the powerful world of politics and warfare, but it was his education that truly set him apart. His father, eager to cultivate a mind capable of ruling an empire, arranged for him to be tutored by Aristotle, the legendary philosopher. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander's education wasn't just about the classics. It was about understanding the nature of power, governance, and the ways in which philosophy could be applied to leadership. Aristotle instilled in him a deep appreciation for Greek culture, particularly the works of Homer, which ignited Alexander's obsession with the idea of heroic greatness. From a young age, Alexander demonstrated qualities that went far beyond typical royal expectations. At just 16, when his father, King Philip II, was away on campaign, Alexander was left in charge of Macedonia, a kingdom that had been rapidly expanding under Philip's rule. Instead of simply maintaining the status quo, Alexander took immediate action to solidify his authority. One of his first notable achievements was quelling a rebellion by the Thracians, a fierce group of tribesmen to the north. Not only did he swiftly neutralize the threat, but he also managed to establish control over the rebellious regions, solidifying his leadership and gaining the respect of those under his rule. His ability to manage military strategy, diplomacy, and local governance while still in his teenage years was a clear sign of his potential. But what truly set Alexander apart was his obsession with legacy and personal greatness, particularly his admiration for Achilles, the legendary hero of Greek mythology. Achilles, immortalized in Homer's Iliad, was not just a warrior, but an icon of unrelenting ambition and honor. Alexander saw in Achilles not just a hero, but a reflection of his own destiny, one filled with conquest, glory, and eternal fame. He identified so deeply with Achilles that he carried a copy of the Iliad with him on every campaign and even kept a personal version of Achilles' armor. For Alexander, the myth of Achilles wasn't just a story, it was a roadmap for his own life. His desire to emulate the legendary warrior's greatness fueled an obsession to surpass the limits of ordinary leadership. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted to carve his name into history as someone who transcended the typical boundaries of power, achieving a legacy that would outlive him and inspire future generations. As he grew older, this passion for heroic glory became a driving force that shaped every aspect of his life. The idea of leaving behind a legacy worthy of the greatest heroes of myth evolved from a mere childhood dream into a guiding principle that would influence his decisions as a ruler and conqueror. Alexander's ambition wasn't limited to personal power. It was about becoming a mythic figure, one whose name would be remembered for centuries to come. In this way, his early achievements, combined with the philosophical teachings of Aristotle, set the stage for his future conquests and defined his relentless pursuit of greatness. The trajectory of Alexander's rise to power was irrevocably altered. with the assassination of his father, King Philip II, in 336 BCE. Philip, who had unified Greece through a combination of diplomacy and military conquest, left behind a kingdom poised for greater expansion. At just 20 years old, Alexander ascended to the throne, inheriting not only his father's formidable army, but also the heavy weight of maintaining an empire that was on the brink of further conquest. Though his youth might have raised doubts, Alexander was determined to prove himself. The murder of Philip, while leaving a vacuum of leadership, also ignited a fierce drive within Alexander to secure and expand the kingdom his father had created. One of Alexander's first actions as king was to immediately quash any potential threats to his rule. Revolts broke out in several Greek city-states, with many hoping to exploit the transition of power and throw off Macedonian rule. The most significant of these uprisings came from Thebes, a powerful city-state that had long resisted Macedonian dominance. However, Alexander wasted no time in proving his resolve. In a brutal show of strength, he laid siege to Thebes, and after a hard-fought battle, the city was completely destroyed. The city's inhabitants were either killed or sold into slavery, and its buildings were reduced to ashes. This act of ruthlessness sent a clear message to the rest of Greece. Under Alexander, there would be no tolerance for dissent. The burning of Thebes marked the beginning of a reign where fear and respect would be central to maintaining control over a vast and unruly empire. Alexander's decision to destroy Thebes was not only an act of vengeance, but a calculated move to consolidate his power. Thebes had long been a thorn in Macedonia's side, and its resistance to Philip's rule was a symbol of defiance that Alexander could not afford to tolerate. By completely annihilating the city, he delivered a harsh message to all of Greece. Rebellion would not be tolerated. This ruthless suppression of Thebes served to establish his dominance over the Greek world, sending a clear signal that while his father's empire had been built on diplomacy, Alexander's reign would be characterized by swift and unrelenting force. The obliteration of Thebes was an example of his willingness to make tough, often brutal decisions to secure his rule, no matter the cost. However, his actions also reflected a strategic brilliance. Alexander understood that maintaining a united Greece was crucial if he was to achieve his ultimate goal of conquering the Persian Empire. A fragmented Greek world would be vulnerable, easily preyed upon by external enemies, and incapable of mounting the kind of military campaigns that Alexander envisioned. By decisively handling the revolts, Alexander sent a message to the other Greek city-states. They could either fall in line under his leadership or face similar fates. His actions not only secured his power in the short term, but ensured that Greece would remain united under his banner, avoiding potential civil strife that could have derailed his larger ambitions. Once his grip on Greece was firm, Alexander shifted his focus outward, toward Persia. His military genius had been proven in Greece, but now he needed to inspire his troops and the Greek city-states to embark on a far more ambitious and dangerous venture, a campaign into Asia, with the goal of overthrowing the mighty Persian Empire. Yet before he could launch his invasion, Alexander took care to ensure that Greece was solidly behind him. By framing the war with Persia as a common cause for all of Greece, he tapped into the Greek desire for revenge against the Persians, who had previously invaded Greece under Xerxes. But it wasn't just military prowess that made Alexander so compelling. It was his ability to unite the Greek states under his rule, a feat that required not just military force, but diplomacy, charisma, and the sheer force of his personality. Through this combination of tactics, Alexander positioned himself not only as the king of Macedonia, but as the natural leader of the Greek world, ready to lead them to glory in battle against their ancient enemy. His destiny, as he saw it, was no longer merely to rule over Macedonia. It was to lead the Greeks to victory on the world stage. Alexander's motivation for the Persian campaign was deeply personal, driven by both a thirst for vengeance and the desire to expand his empire. The Greeks had long remembered the invasions of Persia, especially the two massive attacks led by King Xerxes I in the early 5th century BCE, which left a deep scar in the collective memory of the Greek world. Despite the Greek victories at Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea, the idea of Persia as a powerful and relentless enemy persisted. For Alexander, this long-standing animosity provided the perfect justification for his ambitious quest, to avenge Greece's past losses and to fulfill the prophecy of a great Greek conqueror defeating the Persian Empire. It was not merely about defeating a rival, It was about securing his place in history as the Avenger of Greece, a hero who would rise above his predecessors and reshape the world. His campaign began with the Battle of Granicus in 334 BCE, which marked his first major clash with the Persians. Leading his army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor, Alexander faced the Persian satraps, provincial governors, and their forces near the river Granicus. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's tactical genius shone through. His cavalry charged with relentless speed and ferocity, breaking the Persian lines and securing a decisive victory. This early victory was crucial for two reasons. It boosted his reputation as a formidable military leader and allowed him to seize control of Asia Minor, weakening Persian influence in the region. Alexander's victory at Granicus also set the tone for his campaign, as he demonstrated his ability to inspire and lead his troops through difficult terrain and intense battles. Following Granicus, Alexander moved southward into Syria, where he faced the Persian king Darius III at the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE. Darius had gathered an enormous army, vastly outnumbering Alexander's forces. Yet, in a stunning display of tactical brilliance, Alexander used the narrowness of the battlefield to his advantage, nullifying the Persians' numerical superiority. The battle was a stunning success for Alexander. Darius was forced to flee, abandoning his family and his forces in the chaos. This victory not only gave Alexander control over much of Asia Minor, but also cemented his reputation as a military genius capable of defying the odds. The capture of Darius's family was symbolic of his dominance and further humiliated the Persian king, signaling that Alexander was not just a conqueror, but a force capable of reshaping the political and cultural landscape of the ancient world. Next came the Siege of Tyre in 332 BCE, one of the most remarkable feats of Alexander's military career. Tyre, a fortified island city off the coast of modern-day Lebanon, had long resisted Persian rule and refused to submit to Alexander's authority. In an extraordinary demonstration of engineering and perseverance, Alexander ordered his army to build a causeway out to the island, a monumental task that took months to complete. Once the causeway was finished, Alexander launched an assault on Tyre, which was protected by strong defenses. The siege lasted for several months, but Alexander's determination paid off when the city finally fell. The defeat of Tyre was a major psychological blow to the Persians, as it demonstrated that no city, no matter how well defended, was safe from Alexander's relentless pursuit of conquest. After securing the eastern Mediterranean, Alexander turned his attention to Egypt, a region that had long been under Persian control. The Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator, eager to shake off the oppressive Persian yoke. In 331 BCE, Alexander entered Egypt and was declared pharaoh, solidifying his hold on the region. His most lasting legacy in Egypt was the founding of the city of Alexandria, which would become a cultural and intellectual center of the ancient world. The city's strategic location on the Mediterranean coast ensured that it would thrive as a hub for trade, learning, and culture. Alexandria's foundation also marked a pivotal moment in Alexander's vision for his empire, one that would combine the best elements of Greek culture with those of the regions he conquered, ensuring that his legacy would endure long after his death. The turning point of his Persian campaign came with the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, a decisive confrontation that would ultimately determine the fate of the Persian Empire. Darius III, having gathered another massive army, met Alexander on the plains of Gaugamela near modern-day Iraq. Despite facing overwhelming numbers, Alexander once again demonstrated his unparalleled tactical genius. By using his cavalry and infantry in precise coordination, he was able to outflank and rout the Persian forces. Darius once again fled the battlefield, this time abandoning his army for good. The defeat at Gaugamela effectively shattered Persian power, and Alexander's conquest of the Persian Empire was all but complete. Darius III would soon be killed by his own men, and Alexander became the undisputed ruler of Persia. With his victory at Gaugamela, Alexander had not only avenged Greece but had also fulfilled his destiny, becoming the greatest conqueror of the ancient world. Having shattered the might of Persia, Alexander's insatiable thirst for conquest led him further, eastward into the unknown lands of India at the very edge of the world as the Greeks understood it. For Alexander, the campaign was no longer just about vengeance against Persia. It was about pushing the boundaries of the world, seeking to expand his empire into realms beyond anything anyone had ever dreamed of. His journey into the East symbolized not only the physical expansion of his empire, but the spread of his own myth and legacy, reaching into the realms of legend. The climax of Alexander's eastern campaign came in 326 BCE at the Battle of the Hydaspes River, where he faced King Porus, a powerful ruler of the region who had gathered a formidable army, including war elephants, to defend his territory. Porus's forces were well prepared for battle, and the terrain of the river itself posed a unique challenge. However, Alexander's tactical brilliance prevailed once again. He crossed the river in the dead of night, using the element of surprise to outflank Porus's army. The battle that followed was a hard-fought one, but Alexander's forces, despite being somewhat outnumbered, emerged victorious. The defeat of King Porus was significant not just for its military triumph, but because it demonstrated Alexander's ability to adapt to new warfare strategies and conquer even the most daunting challenges. Alexander treated the defeated Porus with great respect, reinstating him as the ruler of his territory and adding it to his ever-expanding empire. This victory in India seemed to validate Alexander's belief that there was no limit to his conquest, that no land was too distant or formidable for him to conquer. However, despite these stunning successes, cracks began to appear in the resolve of Alexander's own army. After years of relentless campaigning, they were exhausted. The prospect of moving further east into the vast unknown of India, perhaps even into lands that seemed mythical and dangerous, began to wear on the troops. The men who had followed Alexander through countless battles and unimaginable hardships now stood on the banks of the Beas River, uncertain and unwilling to proceed. The mutiny that erupted among Alexander's men at this point was not merely a military revolt. It was a culmination of years of unrelenting warfare, harsh climates, and the profound psychological toll of pushing into territories where even the legends of the ancient world stopped. They had crossed the known boundaries, and now the fear of the unknown was too much. Faced with the prospect of continuing into the heart of India, Alexander had no choice but to relent and turn back, marking a pivotal moment in his campaign. The army's refusal to continue forced Alexander to confront the limits of human endurance and ambition. Despite his dreams of conquering the entire known world, even his legendary resolve could not compel his men to march into the unknown. Yet, the journey back westward was no less harrowing than the campaign itself. To return to the Persian heartland, Alexander led his army through the Gedrosian Desert, one of the most grueling and unforgiving environments on Earth. The desert was notorious for its extreme heat, lack of water, and the near impossibility of crossing it without suffering immense hardship. The crossing became one of the most legendary and tragic chapters in Alexander's campaign. The desert sapped the strength of his soldiers, and many perished from the brutal conditions. The sheer scale of the ordeal left a lasting mark on Alexander, who had always prided himself on his ability to overcome the most daunting challenges. This trek through the desert represented the end of his eastward march, marking both the literal and symbolic return from the edge of the known world. In many ways, Alexander's campaign into India was the culmination of his extraordinary ambition. He had conquered the Persian Empire, crossed the Hellespont, defeated countless armies, and even reached the farthest edge of the known world. Yet, it was in India, at the Hydaspes River, at the moment of mutiny, and in the brutal desert, that the limits of his power, his ambition, and his empire became clear. His failure to move further into India, coupled with the suffering endured on the desert march back, highlighted that even Alexander the Great could not defy the natural limits of human endurance. Nonetheless, his journey into the East would forever define him as one of history's most daring and visionary leaders, whose dreams and conquests reshaped the ancient world in ways no one before him had ever imagined. Alexander's personality was as complex as his legacy, a potent mixture of brilliance, charisma, and a ruthless determination to achieve his goals, often to the point of brutality. On the one hand, he exhibited the strategic genius of a master tactician, able to outthink and outmaneuver opponents on the battlefield. His ability to inspire loyalty and command respect from his soldiers was unmatched. On the other hand, his vision for empire building often pushed him to the limits of cruelty. The destruction of Thebes, the siege of Tyre, and his treatment of conquered peoples often demonstrated an unyielding and at times excessively harsh side of his character. This blend of brilliance and brutality allowed him to achieve what no other conqueror before him had managed, yet it also left a trail of destruction and suffering that would forever be linked to his name. One of Alexander's most remarkable traits was his grand vision for a unified empire, one that transcended cultural boundaries and brought together East and West. He sought not only to conquer but to fuse the diverse cultures within his empire into a singular, cohesive entity. One of the ways he tried to achieve this was through his marriages and the promotion of cultural exchange. He himself married several women from the lands he conquered, including Roxane, a princess from Bactria, modern-day Afghanistan, and later, 2 other noble women from Persia. These unions were not merely political, but symbolized his desire to integrate the cultures of the conquered peoples into his empire, encouraging the blending of Greek and Persian customs, art, and governance. By encouraging the intermarriage of his soldiers and local nobility, Alexander sought to create a new class of elite who could govern the vast territories he had won, fostering unity through shared cultural and political ties. In addition to marriages, Alexander promoted the spread of Greek culture throughout his empire. He founded over 20 cities, many of which were named Alexandria, to serve as cultural and administrative hubs. These cities became melting pots where Greek language, art, and philosophy were introduced to local populations, while also incorporating local customs and traditions. The city of Alexandria in Egypt, perhaps the most famous of these, would go on to become a center of learning and culture, known for its great library and intellectual legacy. Through these cities, Alexander hoped to create a legacy that would endure beyond his own lifetime, one that would facilitate the fusion of cultures and help cement the Hellenistic civilization as a new cultural force in the ancient world. However, alongside his vision of unity, Alexander's behavior began to change as he moved further into his conquests. His belief in his own destiny, compounded by his extraordinary success, began to take on a more divine and even godlike character. His claim to divine ancestry, he was said to be the son of Zeus, and later, the Egyptian gods, became more pronounced, and his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He started to demand the worship of his subjects as a god, and in some instances would punish anyone who refused to acknowledge his divine status. His interactions with his closest companions and generals, once marked by camaraderie and shared ambition, began to shift as he became more unpredictable, at times turning on those who were once his most loyal supporters. His actions, such as the execution of his friend and general Parmenion, reflected the darker side of his psyche, a mind pushed to the brink by the pressures of leadership, success, and his own growing delusions of divinity. This god complex, combined with his unpredictable nature, created an increasingly tense atmosphere within his ranks. Alexander's changing behavior became a source of tension among his soldiers, many of whom began to question his leadership as he veered further away from the pragmatic and charismatic leader they had once followed. His insistence on being treated as a living god, as well as his harsh reprisals against those who opposed his vision, made it clear that his earlier charisma had given way to a more autocratic, unpredictable style of rule. Despite the challenges and the eventual unraveling of his leadership, Alexander's legacy was nothing short of monumental. His conquests fundamentally reshaped the political and cultural landscape of the ancient world. He created an empire that stretched from Greece all the way to India, an achievement that had never before been realized. Beyond the military successes, Alexander's blending of cultures, the cities he founded, and the spread of Greek ideas had a profound and lasting impact on world history. The Hellenistic era, which followed Alexander's death, saw the spread of Greek culture, philosophy, and art across a vast swath of the ancient world, influencing generations of thinkers, artists, and rulers. Alexander's vision of a unified empire, however flawed and incomplete, set the stage for the cultural and intellectual exchange that defined the ancient world for centuries to come. Even in death, his legend lived on, inspiring countless future leaders, warriors, and visionaries to aim for greatness, to push beyond the limits of the known world, and to dream of empires that could transcend time and space. The mysterious death of Alexander the Great at the age of 32 in 323 BCE remains one of history's most perplexing and debated events. After years of triumphant campaigns and the achievement of an empire that spanned much of the known world, Alexander's sudden and unexpected death shocked his followers and the entire ancient world. He had been in Babylon, a city he had intended to make the capital of his vast empire, when he fell ill. His illness started with a fever, which grew increasingly severe, and within days he died. The timing of his death, so close to the peak of his power, raised suspicions and fueled numerous theories surrounding the cause of his untimely demise. One of the most common theories is that Alexander died from a fever caused by an infectious illness. The most likely culprit is malaria or typhoid fever, both of which were common in the ancient world. Malaria, transmitted by mosquitoes, could have caused the high fever, chills, and other symptoms that preceded Alexander's death. Typhoid fever, caused by bacterial infection, could also account for the rapid progression of his symptoms and his eventual collapse. Given the conditions of the ancient world and the lack of effective medical treatment, it is plausible that such an illness could have claimed his life after a relatively short period of suffering. However, the theory of poisoning has persisted throughout history, largely because of the suddenness of Alexander's death and the fact that he had shown no signs of significant illness beforehand. Some ancient sources suggested that Alexander was poisoned by political rivals or disgruntled generals who feared his growing power and ambitions. The idea of poisoning became more popular over time, especially as it was noted that his symptoms appeared rapidly and worsened quickly. However, many historians argue that poisoning would likely have killed Alexander more quickly, and the fact that his illness lasted for several days makes poisoning less likely. Additionally, the fact that Alexander's close companions and generals, who would have had the most to gain from his death, were deeply distraught by the event further complicates the poisoning theory. Another theory is that his death was the result of stress and overwork, particularly given the immense psychological and physical toll of his years of campaigning. Having spent most of his adult life in constant battle and at the forefront of military campaigns, Alexander was under constant pressure. His relentless drive to conquer, combined with the harsh conditions of his travels and the strain of ruling over a massive and diverse empire, could have contributed to the weakening of his health. Some historians suggest that the intense exhaustion, combined with the mental strain of overseeing such an enormous empire, may have led to the collapse of his immune system, leaving him vulnerable to illness. Despite the theories, the truth behind Alexander's death remains elusive, and scholars continue to debate the exact cause. The mysterious nature of his demise only added to the mythos surrounding his life. His death left his vast empire without a clear successor, as he had no legitimate heir and had made no provisions for who would inherit his throne. The lack of a clear plan for succession led to immediate instability and power struggles among his generals, known as the Diadochi. These men, who had served under Alexander, soon began to fight among themselves for control of different parts of the empire, ultimately leading to its fragmentation. Within a few years of Alexander's death, his empire was divided into several Hellenistic kingdoms, each ruled by one of his former generals or family members. The unity of the empire he had built was shattered, but his legacy lived on in the cultures and cities he had established. Despite the political chaos that followed his death, Alexander's influence continued to resonate long after his passing. His empire, though short-lived, had brought Greek culture, ideas, and governance to a vast portion of the world, setting the stage for the Hellenistic period that would define the next few centuries. His military tactics, leadership style, and vision of empire building continue to be studied and admired to this day. Alexander's mysterious death, coupled with the empire he left behind, ensured that his name would remain etched in history as one of the greatest military leaders and most influential figures of all time. Alexander's death may have marked the end of his empire, but it was also the beginning of a new era, the Hellenistic era. The rapid spread of Greek culture and ideas across vast swaths of the ancient world fundamentally altered the course of history. As his empire fragmented among his generals, known as the Diadochi, they continued to spread Greek influences across the territories they controlled, from Egypt and Persia to India. What Alexander had sought to achieve in life, blending East and West, creating a unified empire, came to fruition in the aftermath of his death, though it happened in a much more fragmented and disjointed manner than he had ever envisioned. One of the most profound aspects of Alexander's legacy was the cultural diffusion that occurred under his rule. Greek language, art, and architecture spread far beyond the borders of Greece itself, creating a lasting cultural foundation in many of the regions Alexander had conquered. Greek became the lingua franca of the Hellenistic world, widely spoken from Egypt to Asia, and it became the language of commerce, governance, and intellectual pursuit. This helped create a common bond among disparate peoples, facilitating communication and exchange. Greek architectural styles and artistic techniques, which emphasized beauty, proportion, and symmetry, were adopted and adapted throughout the empire, leaving behind magnificent structures and art that still influence Western civilization today. In the realms of philosophy, science, and education, Greek ideas proliferated across the lands Alexander had conquered. The foundations for institutions like the famous Library of Alexandria were laid, creating a space for intellectual exchange and preservation of knowledge. Greek philosophers, scientists, and mathematicians contributed to an intellectual golden age that lasted long after Alexander's death, influencing the development of Western thought for centuries to come. The Greek cultural impact on architecture, science, and governance during the Hellenistic period set the stage for the rise of the Roman Empire and the subsequent spread of Western civilization across Europe. Alexander's influence did not end in the ancient world. His military tactics and leadership style became a source of inspiration for future conquerors, including Rome's greatest generals and even Napoleon Bonaparte. The Roman Empire, which absorbed much of the Hellenistic world, adopted many aspects of Greek culture, including its philosophy, art, and governance. Roman generals, including Julius Caesar and Pompey, studied Alexander's campaigns for their strategic brilliance. They modeled themselves after him, seeking to emulate his swift and decisive victories. Similarly, Napoleon, whose ambition mirrored that of Alexander, sought to recreate the grandeur of his empire, often drawing parallels between himself and the Macedonian king. Napoleon famously kept a portrait of Alexander in his study and referred to him as a source of inspiration during his own campaigns. In the modern era, Alexander's legacy continues to be a powerful symbol of ambition, leadership, and military genius. He has become an archetype of the conqueror and the visionary ruler who shaped the course of history through sheer willpower and determination. His name still carries weight in the lexicon of world leaders, with military academies around the world studying his tactics and strategies. His campaigns are often seen as an example of how to wield military power and how to lead men across great distances, inspiring modern generals and military strategists. Yet the image of Alexander in popular culture and historical memory is far more complex than the reality of his life and actions. Over the centuries, the myth of Alexander has often overshadowed the man himself. The tales of his exploits, his near-superhuman feats of strength and leadership, and his godlike persona have been amplified and romanticized. In literature and art, he is often depicted as an idealized hero, a symbol of perfection and power, who could never be defeated. This mythological version of Alexander has been used to inspire admiration, reverence, and even fear. The reality of his reign, with its brutality, constant warfare, and often autocratic rule, is often glossed over in favor of the more glamorous aspects of his legacy. Alexander's complicated personality, his brilliance and his brutality, his idealism and his arrogance, has led to a legacy that is as much about myth as it is about history. While he was undoubtedly one of the most brilliant military commanders in history, his decisions often brought suffering to the lands he conquered. The question of whether his vision of a unified empire would have succeeded had he lived longer remains an open one. Would his policies of cultural fusion have taken root, or would they have led to more chaos and division? Ultimately, the way history remembers Alexander speaks to a broader tendency to elevate extraordinary individuals into the realm of legend. The reality of his life, the political struggles, the betrayals, the crushing of dissent, is often left out of the myth. But the impact of his conquests, both in terms of cultural diffusion and military strategy, cannot be denied. His legacy, whether viewed through the lens of myth or reality, continues to shape the world we live in today. Alexander the Great's life and legacy continue to captivate and fascinate us centuries after his death. His rapid rise to power, his extraordinary military conquests, and his ambition to unite the known world through cultural fusion are compelling aspects of his story that resonate even in the modern era. The grandeur of his achievements, the scope of his empire, and the enduring impact of his vision all contribute to his lasting mythos. But beyond the fame and the glory, what makes Alexander particularly intriguing is the paradoxical nature of his character. A brilliant, ambitious, and visionary leader who, despite conquering vast territories, could not conquer his own inner demons. The lessons we can draw from Alexander's life are profound. His unrelenting ambition shows us the power of vision and determination, and how these qualities can propel a leader to extraordinary heights. Alexander's ability to inspire loyalty in his soldiers and unite diverse cultures under his rule demonstrates the importance of charisma and leadership in shaping the course of history. His strategic brilliance on the battlefield, his adaptability, and his willingness to push boundaries all serve as timeless lessons in the art of leadership. Yet, his tragic flaw, his inability to control his own ego and the consequences of his unchecked ambition, offers a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris. His obsession with achieving greatness ultimately led to his downfall, leaving behind a fragmented empire and a legacy that was as much about destruction as it was about creation. Alexander's life also teaches us about the limits of human power. Even the greatest conqueror the world has ever known was not immune to the forces of fate, illness, and mortality. His early death left many questions unanswered. What might have happened had he lived longer? Would he have been able to unite his empire and build the harmonious, lasting civilization he envisioned? Or would the internal divisions that began to surface after his death have unraveled his grand dream? These questions keep us engaged with Alexander's story, offering a window into the uncertainties that accompany ambition and leadership. In the end, Alexander the Great remains a figure who both inspires and warns. He achieved the impossible, yet his inability to master himself prevented him from fully realizing his vision. As history reflects on his life, we are reminded of the complexity of human nature, the fine line between brilliance and madness, between greatness and self-destruction. His life serves as a testament to what one person can achieve, but also a reflection on the limits of even the most extraordinary individuals. Final thought. He conquered the world, but couldn't conquer himself. Alexander's story is a poignant reminder that, while we may conquer great challenges and leave behind lasting legacies, the true test lies in how we master ourselves and navigate the complexities of power and ambition. If you enjoyed this dive into ancient history, make sure to subscribe for more legendary stories from the past. Drop a comment below. Was Alexander the Great a hero or a tyrant in your eyes? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this complex figure and his enduring legacy.